The train came into Big Timber a little after 4 in the afternoon of a dry September day in 1879, and Susannah Sutter stepped down onto the cinders with her carpet-bag in one hand and her own saddle balanced against her hip, the way a woman carries a thing she does not intend to let out of her sight. The town behind the platform was 9 buildings and a water tank, and beyond the water tank the country simply opened, brown and gold and rolling away to a rim of blue mountains that would take a man 2 days to reach. She stood a moment in the smell of coal smoke and cattle and took its measure. There was no shade anywhere and no place to hide, and she found that she did not mind. In her father's line of work, a place that hid nothing was a mercy. A man came along the platform with his hat already in his hands, and she knew before he opened his mouth that he was not the one who had written her the letter. He was 50 or near it, burned dark to the collar line, and he walked with the bowed care of a man who had been thrown a great many times and had gotten up each time a little slower. "Mrs. Sutter?" "Miss," she said. "Until Sunday, anyhow." "Micah Lacey. I run the crew at Red Willow, which is to say, I am the crew." He looked at the saddle and then looked at it again, and something in his face rearranged itself. "Mr. Fenwick sends his apology. He's out on the East Flat since before light, counting." "Counting what?" Lacey put his hat on. "That's about the size of the question," he said, and reached for her carpet-bag, and did not reach for the saddle, which she noted and gave him credit for. The buckboard went out of town on a road that was 2 ruts and a middle, and for 2 miles neither of them said anything, which suited her. She watched the country instead. She had been taught to read land the way other women were taught to read music, and the land here told her it was good. Bunch grass silvering in the wind, coulees deep enough to hold cattle out of the January wind that would come down off those mountains and kill anything standing in the open. It was good country. It should have had 4 times the cattle on it that she saw. "How short?" she said. Lacey's hands did not move on the lines. "Ma'am? You said counting. A man who is happy with his count says branding or shipping or gathering. He does not say counting. So, how short?" The old hand chewed on it for the better part of a 1/4 mile. 3 seasons running," he said finally. "First year we called it Winterkill, and it was a hard winter, so nobody argued. Second year we called it Wolves. This year we quit calling it anything." He spat over the wheel. "Tally came up 91 head light in June. 91 head, Miss Sutter, and not one carcass, not one hide, not one raven sitting on anything out there. And no trail. I've hunted for a drove trail till my eyes bled. 40 or 50 head moving off this range would cut a road you could see from a moving train. There's nothing. Did he write me any of that? He wrote you the place was hard and the money was thin." Lacey looked straight ahead. "That's a man being honest as far as pride lets him. It is rougher than that." "Then it is a good thing," she said, "that I did not come out here for the money." Red Willow lay in a bend of the creek it was named for, and the first thing she understood about Thaddeus Fenwick she learned before she ever laid eyes on him. The place was poor, and the place was kept. The wire was stretched tight, the gate swung true without a man lifting it, and the woodpile was ricked square enough to please an army. Nothing on the place was falling down. That was the whole story in one look, and it told her the trouble at Red Willow was not laziness, and was not drink, and was not bad luck with the weather. Something was taking from this place while the man on it worked himself thin, keeping every board nailed. The ruin was being brought in from outside and set down in the middle of honest work. He came off the porch as the buckboard rolled in, and he was tall and sun-scoured and about 35, and he had shaved for her badly. His good shirt did not fit him any more, and she understood that too. "Miss Sutter?" He took his hat off and held it the way Lacey had. "I meant to meet the train." "You had cattle to count." "I did." A pause. "There's coffee?" Mrs. Lacey left bread. "You'll want to sit down after that train, and there's water hot if you want to wash, and I thought, Sunday, if that suits. The preacher comes through on Sunday, but there's no hurry on it, none at all, and if you look at this place and want to go back east on Thursday's train, I will pay your fare, and no hard word said." Susannah Sutter set her carpet-bag on the step. She was tired to the bone, and she had eaten nothing since Bismarck but crackers, and she wanted the coffee more than she wanted her own name. She walked past him to the near pen instead, and put her forearms on the top rail, and looked at the 11 heads standing in there in the last of the daylight. "After a while," she said, "let me look at your cattle first." In the morning she came out of the house at grey light in a divided skirt she had sewn herself, with her father's rope on her shoulder, and asked Lacey for a horse that would hold a rope and not quit her halfway through it. He gave her a stocky grueler with a scar on his hip and watched her saddle him with her own saddle, and something in the old man went quiet and stayed quiet, which she came to learn was as close as Micah Lacey ever got to applause. Thaddeus came out of the barn with a bucket in his hand and stopped where he was. She built her loop small because the pen was small, and she took the big line-backed steer that had been drifting from her since she first put her arms on that rail the evening before. She caught him clean around the horns, took her dallies, let the grueler set back, and put him down against the rail with the rope run under and around his forelegs, the way her father had shown her when she was 9 years old, in the dust of a shipping pen at Ogallala, with 200 men watching and none of them looking at her. Lacey came in and took a hind leg. The steer bawled once and lay still. She knelt at his ribs and wetted her palm from the water bucket and smoothed the hair down flat over the left hip and looked for about as long as it takes to read a short sentence. "Mr. Fenwick," she said, "come here and look at your brand." He came and squatted beside her, and she took his hand, the first time she touched him, and laid his fingers on the hide. "Feel it, not look. Feel. He frowned. "It's ridged. There's more of it than there ought to be. There's a great deal more of it than there ought to be." She traced it for him with her thumbnail, slow. "Your father's brand is the rocking C. A letter C sitting on a rocker, a quarter circle underneath, left hip. That is what you paid to register, and that is what your iron makes. Now, here is your C, only somebody has run a hot line across its open side and closed it into a circle. And here is your rocker, only somebody has drawn the curl out of both ends of it and made it a straight bar. Circle over a bar. Do you know that mark?" Thaddeus Fenwick did not answer for a moment. When he did, his voice had gone flat and careful, the voice of a man walking on ice and listening to it. "That's the circle bar," he said. "That's Barnaby Harmon's mark." "Then your cattle are not being stolen," Susannah said. "They are being renamed." She showed him the rest of it, because he needed to see it and because she needed to hear herself say it out loud, to be certain the thing she had suspected on the buckboard road was standing here in the daylight. A brand healed a year is a wide pale scar with the hair grown thin over it. A brand 3 weeks old is raised and shiny, and the hide is drawn tight and angry around it. On this steer's hip, both ages sat in the same figure, the old scar making 2/3 of a circle and a curl, and laid over it the closing stroke and the 2 straightened ends of the bar, younger by 3 years and shining. "He is not using a stamp iron," she said. "You cannot make a new figure out of an old one with a stamp. He is using a running iron, or a cinch ring held in 2 green sticks, and he is drawing on your cattle with it, like a man with a pen. And here is why you cannot find a trail, Mr. Fenwick. There is no trail. Nobody drives them anywhere. 2 men ride out in June with a fire and a ring, and they work over 40 head where they stand, on your grass, and they leave them right there. Your cattle go on eating your grass all summer wearing another man's mark. Come the fall gather, the circle bar rides through and gathers circle bar cattle in front of witnesses, honest as church, and every man on the roundup crew will swear he saw nothing but a man collecting his own strays. 3 years, he was still crouched, still touching it. 3 years I've been going out there counting and swearing at wolves. Wolves leave bones, she said. He stood up slowly and looked out at the flat, and she let him have the minute. She had come out on that train with a photograph she had never seen, and a letter she had read so many times the fold had gone soft, expecting a plain arrangement between 2 people who had run out of other roads, a house to keep, a man to feed, a bargain she meant to hold up honestly. She had not expected to be angry on his behalf inside of one day. "I want 3 things," she said when he turned around. "I want that grueler horse and free run of every mile of this range, and no man telling me where a woman ought not ride. I want your father's old tally books and his brand book, the one he'd have kept from the days when he registered the Rocking Sea, and I want your word that when I find it, you will not go get your rifle and undo the whole of it in one afternoon." Thaddeus Fenwick looked at her for a long moment. He was a man being handed a thing he had stopped believing existed, and she watched him decide to trust it. "My father's books are in the trunk under the window," he said. "The lid sticks." They were married on the Thursday, in the front parlour of the preacher's house in Big Timber, with Micah Lacey and the preacher's wife standing witness, and the whole business taking 11 minutes by the clock on the mantel. She wore her good grey dress. He wore the shirt that did not fit. Afterward, they bought coffee and salt and 4 boxes of shells and a keg of nails at the Mercantile, and drove home in the buckboard with the sun going down in the dust behind them, and neither one of them said a word about it the entire way. and she found that it did not sit on her the way she had feared it would. The first week went by in the smell of horses and sagebrush and coffee gone cold in a tin. She was in the saddle by first light, and she did not come in until the light went, and she rode the brakes and the coulees and the willow bottoms, gathering, roping, throwing, reading and turning loose. 30 head the first day, 41 the second. She kept her count in a stub-bound notebook with a carpenter's pencil. In a hand her father had drilled into her. The date, the sex, the age off the teeth, the location by section, the brand as registered, and the brand as worn. Thaddeus rode the drift fence on the north line with a spool of wire and a pair of pliers, and when she came in at dusk there would be a fresh horse standing saddled for the morning, and the stove would be going, and he would ask her one question about the day, and then let her eat in peace. He never once asked her whether she was tired. She decided that was the single most respectful thing a man had ever done for her. On the 8th day she found the count in her notebook had grown into a shape. It was not scattered. Every worked-over animal she had thrown was carrying the same 2 alterations by the same hand, and every one of them had been found north and east of the creek, in the country that ran up against the Circle Bar's summer range, and none, not one, had been found in the deep coulees to the south, where the grass was just as good and the cover better. Thieves do not work where the grass is best. Thieves work where the ride home is shortest. She was writing that down when Lacey came in from town with the mail and a face like a closed door. Associations moved the full shipping, he said. Notice is posted. Inspection and loading at the big timber pens, the Saturday after next. 10 days. Thaddeus set down his cup. Full shipping is the 2nd week of November. It has been the 2nd week of November for 6 years. Buyers out of Chicago want beef early, is what the notice says. Mr. Harmon has obliged them. Lacey laid the paper on the table. Mr. Harmon is chairman of the association, so Mr. Harmon obliges who he likes. Susannah looked at the notice for a long time without touching it. 10 days. In 10 days, every cow brute in that country would come through the loading chutes at Big Timber and be inspected and counted and put on a car, and the inspector would read the mark on the hip and write it in the book, and 40 or 60 or 90 head of red willow beef would go east, wearing the Circle Bar, and after that they would be beefsteak in Chicago, and there would be nothing on this earth left to read. He has been warned, she said. By who? By somebody who saw a woman with a rope in the brakes 8 days running and thought that was worth $1 to mention. She folded the notice in half. It does not matter who. It matters that he is in a hurry now, and a man in a hurry leaves more behind him than a man taking his time. She rode out alone the next morning before either of them was awake, because she wanted the ground and she wanted it quiet. What she wanted was not a suspicion. A suspicion was worth nothing at a loading pen. What she wanted was the dirt. She went up the East Fork with the sun coming over her right shoulder, and she rode slow, cutting for sign the way her father had taught her to cut for it, not looking at the ground in front of the horse, but looking a long way out, at the pattern of it, for the place where the pattern went wrong. She found the place a little after 9 o'clock, in a blind coulee with a seep spring at the head of it, and a natural pocket of willow that would hide 50 head from anything but a bird. There had been a fire there, small, careful, no bigger than a hat, and old, and somebody had kicked dirt over it, and the dirt had settled and cracked in the rain, and shown her the ring of ash underneath. She got off and knelt and turned the ash with a stick, and out of it came a cinch ring, blackened and pitted, the leather long since burned away. She sat back on her heels and held it in her palm, and felt the whole thing turn over and come down solid, the way a rope comes tight. A cinch ring, a small fire, 2 green sticks to hold the ring, and a man who could draw. She had been raised on this. She had sat on a corral rail at 7 years old while her father held a piece of hide up to the light and told a district judge in Nebraska exactly which way the hot iron had travelled, and the judge had believed him, and a man had gone to the territorial prison over it. Her father had been dead 4 years, and she had not been able to say his name out loud for 3 of them, and here in a coulee in Montana she said it once, and then put the ring in her coat pocket and got back on the gruller. There was more. Cattle had stood in that pocket and stood a long while, and the ground showed it. The tracks going out went north, spread wide the way cattle drift and not bunched the way cattle are driven, but there were shod horse tracks over the top of them, and one of the horses had a bar shoe on the near fore, which is a thing a man puts on a horse with a cracked hoof, and a thing that no 2 horses in a county are likely to share. She followed the drift for 4 miles to a gap in a drift fence that had been laid down and put back up wrong. the wire on the outside of the posts, and from the gap she could see the roof of Barnaby Harmon's big house, away off on the bench, white as a tooth, with cottonwoods planted around it, that somebody had hauled water to for 15 years. She came in at dark and laid the cinch ring on the table between the lamp and the sugar. "Who else is short?" she said. "Not you. Who else?" Thaddeus turned the ring over. "Cephas Brindle, over on the Lazy J. He won't talk about it. He come up short 2 years, and he sold off his saddle horses in the spring." He set it down. "And the Cordell place. Widow Cordell. Her husband run the quarter circle O until he died in the spring of 77. And after he died, she couldn't keep a count on anything, so people say she just didn't have the head for it. She has the head for it. She used to keep his books for him. Then tomorrow," Susannah said, "we go and be neighbourly." Cephas Brindle met them in his yard with a shotgun in the crook of his arm, not pointed, just present, and he did not ask them to come in. He was a thin man with a bad cough and eyes that went to the road every minute or two. "I know what you're at," he said. "You're at Harmon." "I am at whoever worked over your cattle. Mrs. Fenwick." He said it patiently, like a man explaining rain. "Barnaby Harmon holds a note on this place. He holds notes on half the county, and he is chairman of the association, and he has the brand registry in his own safe because the association voted it there, and the county attorney shot antelope with him in August. There is no window in this house that I do not look out of and see something of his." "Then let me look at 2 of your steers," she said, "and you can tell me afterward that I looked at nothing." He let her. He stood there with the shotgun and watched her rope a Lazy J steer in his own corral, and throw it and wet the hair down over the left hip, and he came in close without being asked, and got down on his knees in the manure beside her, an old sick man on his knees, and she put his fingers on it and made him feel the ridges the way she had made Thaddeus feel them. "That's my J," he said. "That's the hook of my J run around into his circle." He looked up at her, and his mouth was working. "That's my J. Yes, I have been telling myself for 2 years that I'm a fool who cannot count." He got up, slow, and set the shotgun against the rail and left it there. "What is it you need from me?" "Your tally books, your bills of sale for every head you have bought since 75, your hide pile, every hide off every beef you have butchered or skinned since the spring, and your name on a paper in front of a notary sworn." "Sworn." He laughed, and the laugh turned into the cough. "You know what happens to a man in this country who swears a thing against Barnaby Harmon." "I know what happens to a man who does not," she said. "You have been watching it happen to yourself for 2 years." He turned the hide pile out onto the barn floor with a fork, 11 hides stiff as roofing, and she went through them on her knees with her sleeves shoved up, and 2 of them told her the same story the steer in the corral had told her, only better, because a dead hide cannot flinch and cannot heal any further. 2 Lazy J hides, flesh side up in the barn dark, with the hook of the J run around into a circle and the stem of it dragged out flat into a bar. She salted both and rolled them and put them in the buckboard, and Cephas Brindle stood in his own barn door and watched her do it, and did not say one word until she was up on the seat. "Mrs. Fenwick," he said, "name your day at the notary. I will come in and sign it on my own legs." Ellis Cordell was 70 years old and lived in 4 rooms with a canary, and she had the books out on the table before Susannah had finished asking for them, because she had been waiting 2 years for somebody to come ask. They were beautiful books. The woman had kept them in a small upright hand, with the columns ruled in ink, every calf branded, and every steer sold, and every stray taken up and advertised, and folded into the back of the last one was the thing that Susannah had come to Montana without knowing she was looking for. It was a page out of the original Stockmen's Association Register, the recording copy, given out to the members the year the brands of that district were first set down, 1872, with every mark of the district drawn in ink beside the owner's name. Susannah found the Rocking Sea. She found the Lazy J. She found the quarter circle O, and then she found, 4 lines down, in the same faded brown ink as all the rest, in the same clerk's hand, the entry for Barnaby Harmon of the Big Timber Bench, and the brand drawn beside his name was 1 straight stroke and nothing else on the page at all. A bar. The bar. There was no circle sitting over it anywhere. She sat very still in that little parlour with the canary going and the clock ticking, and understood that she was holding the whole thing in her 2 hands. "Mrs. Cordell," she said, When your husband was alive, did he ever go and look at the register in the association safe? Every spring to check his own entry. Josiah was particular. The old woman folded her hands. The last spring he went, he came home and said a queer thing to me. He said Harmon's entry had got fat. Fat? Those were his words. He said there was more ink in it than there used to be, and the date was gone over. He meant to take it up at the meeting in June. She looked at the canary. He died in April. Susannah asked her for 2 things more. She asked whether the widow would put her hand to a sworn paper in front of a notary, and the old woman said she would put her hand to it in front of the whole county if it came to that, and she asked whether anything had been butchered on the place that summer. There was a quarter-circle steer the hired boy had killed for beef in August, and the hide was in the shed under a tarpaulin with the salt still on it, and Susannah spread it out on the shed floor in the last of the light and turned it flesh side up and found Josiah Cordell's quarter-circle closed into a ring and a bar laid straight beneath it in a second later hand. She rode home in the dark and did not sleep. Somewhere past midnight, she got the lamp and knelt at the trunk under the window and took out Amos Fenwick's brand book again, the book she had been carrying in her coat all week for the drawing of the rocking sea, and she went through it this time page by page and back to front. Folded into the stiff back cover, so long folded that the creases had gone brown, was a second copy of the same 1872 register sheet, because every member of that association had been issued one, and Thaddeus Fenwick's father had been a member and a careful man, and had put his away. Susannah opened it flat on the floorboards beside the widow's page in her memory, and found the 4th line under the caudal entry, and there was Barnaby Harmon's name, and beside his name 1 straight bar in faded brown ink. 2 copies in 2 houses 12 miles apart, in the clerk's own hand, agreeing with each other on every mark in the district, and neither one of them agreeing with the book in the association safe. She sat back on her heels on the cold floor with the lamp guttering, and understood that the last thing she needed had been riding around in her own coat pocket since the first morning. In the morning she took Thaddeus and a skinning knife and a sack of salt out to a coulee on the East Fork, where a 5-year-old steer had died 4 days before with a broken hind leg, one of the worked-over ones she had thrown and turned loose in her first week, and written down in her notebook by section and date. Wolves had been at the hindquarters. The hide over the left hip was untouched. She skinned it out herself, working the knife flat and careful, taking the whole left side off in one piece, and then she turned it over on the grass, flesh side up, and knelt and wiped it clean with her sleeve. On the hair side, a brand is an argument. On the flesh side, it is a confession. Every burn a hot iron makes lays a white scar into the inner hide that no growing hair can cover and no second burn can erase, and the older burn shows dense and yellowed and the newer shows fine and pale, and both of them lie there open like writing on the page. The rocking sea stood on that hide as plain as a printed word, the whole sea, the whole rocker, made in 1879 spring by the Fenwick iron, and laid across it, thin, later, unmistakable, ran 3 strokes of a cinch ring, the closing of the circle and the 2 dragged-out ends of the bar. Thaddeus Fenwick looked at it a long time. "He can't talk his way past that," he said. "He will try to talk his way past all of it," she said. "That is why he is not going to hear about any of it until there are 200 men standing where he cannot ask them to leave the room." She salted the hide and rolled it and tied it, and then she did the last thing, and she did it alone, and she did not tell her husband, and she was clear-eyed about the fact that she was not telling him. He was an honest man, and honesty makes a poor liar, and if Barnaby Harmon rode into that yard and looked at him, he would read it off him in a minute. So on the Monday, she took the buckboard into Big Timber by herself on the excuse of coffee and thread, and she sat in the back room of the land office with a notary, and got 3 sworn statements signed and stamped, her own, Cephas Brindle's, and Ellis Cordell's, the old woman having come in on her own wagon in her black dress with her chin up, and she made a parcel. Ellis Cordell's copy of the 1872 register sheet, the 3 statements, copies of the tallies of all 3 outfits in her own hand, the cinch ring out of the dead fire, and one of the 2 Lazy J hides out of Cephas Brindle's barn, salted and rolled and tied in sacking. Amos Fenwick's copy of that same sheet she did not send. That one stayed where it had been all along, folded into the back of his brand book, and the brand book stayed under her coat. A thing that exists in one house can be lost. A thing that exists in 2 houses and a government office in Helena cannot be lost by anybody. And she paid a crowboy who rode for the express $11 of her own money, most of what she had left in the world, to carry the parcel to the office of the Territorial Stock Commissioner at Helena, and put it in a man's hands, and wait for a paper saying he had. Then she went home and made supper and said nothing at all for the 5 days that were left. On the Thursday, the express boy came trotting into the yard with 2 papers in his fist, the receipt out of Helena with a clerk's stamp on it, and folded inside the receipt a short note in a stranger's hand, written that same morning at the land office in Big Timber by a man who had come in on the noon train and did not intend to be seen before Saturday. She read them both standing by the wheel with the wind pulling at the corners, and folded them away into her pocket, and went in and set the table and asked her husband about the north fence. Shipping day came in clear and cold with a wind that smelled like winter coming. By 8 in the morning, the pens at Big Timber were full and bawling. 11 stock cars stood waiting on the siding, and every outfit in 200 square miles was crowded 3 deep along the fences to watch the reading of the brands. Barnaby Harmon came at 9 on a blood bay, with 4 riders behind him and his hat brushed. He was 60 and silver over the ears, and he had the finest manners in the territory, and he went down the line of the pens shaking hands and remembering the names of men's children, and when he came to the red willow bunch he took his hat off to Susannah and held it against his chest. Mr. Fenwick, and this must be the bride. He smiled at her with real warmth, and that was the part she would remember longest, that the warmth was real. We had heard. Congratulations to you both. Ma'am, I'm told you have been riding our brakes like a hired hand. That will pass. The first winter cures the romance out of this country. My wife, Thaddeus said, is a brand inspector's daughter. Is she? Harmon's eyes did not change at all. Then she is in good company today. Mr. Pruitt, are we ready to read? The association's inspector was a heavy, careful man named Odell Pruitt, with a book under his arm, and he had the chute gate half open when Susannah stepped into the alley in front of it. Mr. Pruitt, she said, loud enough to carry to the fence, before you read that book, hold this bunch and cut me out the line-backed steer standing in it, the one your book is about to call a circle bar stray, out of Fenwick's gather, and let 2 of these buyers stand where they can see. The dust and the bawling went on, but the men on the fence went quiet in a way that spread. Pruitt looked at Harmon. Harmon spread his hands, gracious, amused, a man indulging a guest. Cut her the steer, he said. She roped him in the alley herself and threw him against the boards, and Micah Lacey took a hind leg, and she knelt in the dirt with 2 Chicago buyers, and the inspector leaning over the rail above her, and wetted the hair down over the left hip and said, "Read it." Pruitt read it. She saw the moment it turned in his face. "Say it out," she said. "It's the circle bar," Pruitt said. "It's the circle bar, but there's—" He stopped. "There is an old scar under it wide as my thumb and 3 years healed, and a new burn over it bright as a new nail, and the old scar is a C on a rocker, which is the rocking C of Red Willow, registered 1872, and it is on the hip of an animal you are about to write into your book as circle bar and load onto a car." She stood up and dusted her hands. "A stamp iron cannot do that. A cinch ring can." "A stray," Harmon said easily into the silence. "Ma'am, a stray. 60,000 head run loose in this country, and my crew gathers what wears my mark. If one of my men has been careless with an iron in a branding pen, then Mr. Fenwick has my apology and my check for $40 before dinner, and I will horsewhip the man myself. Then you will need a longer whip." Susannah walked to the buckboard and came back with the roll under her arm, and laid it out flat on the platform of the stock scale, flesh side up, and the men came off the fence and crowded in. "This hide came off a red willow steer that died on my range in September. That is the flesh side. You cannot argue with the flesh side, gentlemen. The rocking C is complete and dense and yellowed, made in the spring. Every stroke that turns it into a circle bar is fine and pale and made a season later. No iron on earth made both of those at one time in one branding pen. That is one hide," Harmon said. "It is 3. She turned and took the second roll from Cephas Brindle, who had come up through the crowd with it in both arms like a man carrying a coffin, and the third from Ellis Cordell's hired boy, and she laid them out beside the first, the lazy J with its hook run around into a circle, the quarter circle O with a bar dragged straight beneath it. 3 outfits, 3 different brands, 1 alteration, and it is the same hand every time, and it always ends in the same mark. And gentlemen, when a thief works 100 head of another man's cattle into his own iron, he has 1 more piece of work left to do, because somebody may go look in the register and see that his mark was never built to hold those lines. She took the brand book out from under her coat, and the register page folded into the back of it, and she opened it on the scale beside the hides, and she did not hand it to Harmon. She handed it to Odell Pruitt. That is the recording copy of the Association Register for this district, 1872, drawn in the clerk's own hand in the clerk's own ink and issued to every member that year. That one was Amos Fenwick's, and it has been folded in the back of his brand book in a trunk at Red Willow for 7 years. Mrs. Ellis Cordell of the Quarter Circle O has kept her husband's copy of the same sheet just as long, and the two of them agree with each other on every mark in this district. Read the 4th line under the Cordell entry. Pruitt read it. He read it twice. He looked up, and he had gone a colour that had nothing to do with the cold. "Say it out," Susannah said. "Barnaby Harmon," Pruitt said. "Big timber bench, recorded 1872. He swallowed. "The bar." "The bar," she said. "One straight stroke on the hip and nothing above it. There is no circle in that mark. There never was a circle in that mark." "Mr. Pruitt, the register in the association safe has a circle drawn in over that entry in fresher ink, with the date gone over twice, and that safe has one key, and one man in this county carries it." Josiah Cordell saw the entry had got fat in the spring of 77 and meant to raise it at the June meeting, and he died in April, and no man has looked at that page since. She closed the book. The record was widened first, gentlemen, in a safe where nobody could get at it. Then the mark was widened to swallow his neighbour's marks. And if any man here wants it plainer than a page, go and walk the Circle Bar home pasture and look at hips. Every animal on that place older than 3 years, every cow he raised himself out of his own stock, wears 1 bar and nothing else, because 1 bar is all his iron ever made. Every single head he has taken up as a stray since carries a circle sitting on top of it. Nobody on that fence made a sound. Somewhere down the line a steer put its head over a rail and bawled, and nobody laughed. Barnaby Harmon stood in the middle of 200 men whose fathers he had loaned money to, and she watched him look for the room to move in, and she watched him find it, because he was very good. "This is a serious accusation from a woman who has been in this country 3 weeks, he said, "and it belongs in front of the association, in a proper meeting, with the register itself on the table and counsel present, and not shouted across a loading pen on shipping day, while 11 cars sit on a siding costing these gentlemen money. Mr. Pruitt, load the cattle. We will convene on this Thursday, and I will answer every word of it." "He will not answer it Thursday," Susannah said. "By Thursday, those cattle are beef in Chicago, and that page is a page with a circle on it, and no page underneath it, and every one of you knows it." She turned to the inspector. "Mr. Pruitt, on the 15th day of September, I sent to the office of the Territorial Stock Commissioner at Helena, by paid express and receipt taken, Mrs. Cordell's copy of the very sheet in your hands, 3 sworn and notarized statements, the tallies of 3 outfits, a cinchering out of a fire in a blind coulee 4 miles from the gap in Mr. Harmon's drift fence, and a salted Lazy J hide with the flesh side red. The Commissioner's office holds them, and I have the receipt in my pocket. His man came in on Thursday's train and has been sitting in the land office 2 days waiting for shipping day, and you may go and get him, because he asked me to tell you that no car leaves this siding until he has read every hip in these pens. There is a particular quiet that comes over a crowd when it understands that the thing it was standing in the middle of has already happened somewhere else. She heard it move through those men like wind over grass. Odell Pruitt shut his book. 2 of the Circle Bar riders were already walking, not toward Harmon, and not looking back. Harmon turned and looked at her, and for one moment there was nothing mannered in his face at all, and she met it without moving, because she had grown up around cattle and around men, and she knew exactly what a cornered thing looks like, and exactly how much of it is noise. "Your father," he said, "Sutter, Nebraska. He read hides for the state of Nebraska for 19 years, she said. He taught me on a corral rail before I could write my name. You should have asked before you moved the shipping up to catch me." Barnaby Harmon put his hat on his head. He walked out through that crowd, and the crowd let him through, and not one man put a hand out to him, and he rode north up the bench road alone, and the cottonwoods he had hauled water to for 15 years stood around his white house and did him no good at all. The Commissioner's man came down from the land office with his sleeves rolled and read hips at the big timber pens until dark, and for 2 days after, and in the end he wrote 419 head into his book as worked over, and the shipment sat, and the cars went east half empty, and the papers in Helena had it by the end of the month. They came home to Red Willow on the 2nd evening, with the wind quartering out of the northwest and a first thin skiff of snow lying in the lee of the sagebrush. Thaddeus put the team up and came and stood beside her at the corral rail, the way she had stood the first night, and for a while they watched the recovered stock come drifting back down onto the flat in the last of the light, 300 head and more, coming home to their own grass wearing scars that would tell the truth about them for the rest of their lives. "Susannah," he said. "Yes. I wrote to a woman I never met because I was going under, and I could not do it alone, and that is a poor reason to ask anybody for anything." He turned his hat once in his hands. "I am asking you a different thing now, and I would like it understood as a different thing. Stay, not the arrangement, not the 11 minutes in the preacher's parlour. Stay because I would rather have you on this place than have the place." The wind came down off the blue mountains, and the cattle came on down the flat, and in the near pen the big line-backed steer she had thrown that first grey morning stood square at the rail, with his head over the top pole chewing, watching the others come, no longer walking the fence and no longer hunting a way out. "I don't drift," she said. He took her hand and held it a beat longer than a man holds a hand for no reason, and they stood there in the cold together and counted the herd coming home.